Hello everybody, welcome in this webinar, this train-the-trainer for the NIS2, about the NIS2 I must say. We got a few people in, we got quite a bit more people that registered. So I think we're gonna wait 1 or 2 more minutes, I think. Maybe 2, and then we start. Welcome everybody. Enough acquaintances. Thank you for making time on this Thursday afternoon, even though that here in the Netherlands the weather is beautiful and way too hot to sit inside. So we're extra grateful for you prioritizing watching us rather than sitting outside doing nothing or trying to cool yourself down. So much appreciation for that. And then indeed how we pre-discussed with Michiel how we want to set up this webinar, and Michiel will go through his slides explaining what is the vision behind the training, so that you as a trainer, we kind of assume that you understand what the NIS2 is. He will then share his vision of the training, what he would advise to tell, what he thinks are real requirements to emphasize on. And then the idea is that we include quite a big Q&A, so feel free to ask your questions during the session. I will moderate them to Michiel, so please share everything you find or can make up. Michiel expect that the questions can be in Dutch if you want, Richard. You can ask the questions in Dutch, and then I will in Dutchlish translate them to Michiel. My Dutchlish is very good. Where was it? Oh yeah, so probably the presentation will be around 1 hour, and depending on how many questions and answers we have, it might take longer or less. Definitely, I don't think we will make 2 hours, but if people are really intrigued, feel free to ask as much as you want. Yeah, then I think we start. So I will moderate, as I mentioned. We are recording. Yes, I think there's, if I look at it, I think there's at least one non-Dutch in the session, Richard, and also we like to reuse the recording for people that are from abroad, because the NIS2, of course, is a very European product, and therefore the training material is also in English. But if you want to, you can ask anything in Dutch if you prefer, and then I will ask it to Richard in English. And I know, well, I know that you're quite...
Really?
Yeah.
You can ask Richard in English. You can ask me
I will
too.
ask Michiel in English. Sorry, apologies. I will be the bridge. Sorry. Okay, thank you, Richard. Yeah, so a few more people are joining in. Welcome everybody. We just mentioned we'll keep it below. The session will be about 1 hour, and then we have a very big Q&A. So ask whatever you want to ask. So this NIS2 training, we expect the training material and the certification to come out next month, roughly. And then we expect the book to come somewhat, let's say, in September. Hello, Bjorn. So we expect indeed the publications in July, and the book. Sorry, we expect the courseware in an exam in July and the book around September. This initiative is set up by the European Organisational Compliance Institute. That's a non-for-profit member organization that we help to set up with other, organizations in the industry that feel that there's a strong representation of American certification providers, American-based body of knowledge organizations in the security domain, where the NIS2 and other regulatory directives are European-based. So it's a little bit odd that there's Americans telling us how we need to do our security setup. I don't say that they're wrong, but we feel that it doesn't mind if there's also European representation. With the EU-OCI, the EU Organisational Compliance Institute, in short. We also collaborate with other certification bodies that are joining. This session is done in behalf of van Haren Certify, so therefore I will not address them in person. But the idea of this collective is to really give a European-based representation for the NIS2 and maybe other upcoming directives. Again, please ask your questions in the chat, and then I will moderate them. And then I now give the floor to Michiel. Thank you.
Thank you, Maurits. So thank you all for joining, and really appreciate that. Did not expect to see this many people interested, so that's makes me happy after more than a year of putting together this material. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just go through, my ideas of what this training should be about. Some of the things that I would expect, that I would like, and then I will take you a bit through the actual slide deck that I will use, at least the current version of that, to give you an idea of that flow of information, some of the things that I'd like to emphasize in that, and give you a general feel of what I think will add value to this training. So let me start by sharing my screen. Let me see if I have a share button here. Yeah. Okay, then give me a second here. You guys are all blocking my buttons now.
This will be the first advertising.
Oh yeah, the advertising is very important. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, so you will actually see the certification logo. I kind of blemished it with the train-the-trainer deck text on top of it, but this is pretty much the logo that you will see. That's part of this training. You will see the EU-OCI logo inserted in it. Just my quick background, so you know who you're talking to. I'm Michiel Benda. You have my details here. I actually did hospitality management in the background. Have about 30 years in IT, information security. A lot of experience as a CISO. Have my own company, which I was nicely branding just before. Loads of certifications, as you can see. And the QR code will give you absolute malware infection. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, the QR code is a LinkedIn button, so you can connect anytime you like. So let's start. What is this training about? So like Maurits actually said, the first thing that frustrated me deeply was that one of the first trainings that I saw pop up was one of the very famous American-based companies that do a lot of trainings, and they decided to explain to us how we're going to interpret European legislation. And it bothered me no end. And I was actually working on this training already, because I figured, this is the perfect opportunity to show some chauvinism and say, okay, this is, a European law in security. We're going to take a European approach to explaining what we mean and how it works. So that's what I did, even though, we have the American alternatives. I actually train on the American alternatives, and it will be no surprise to you that I like this one so much better. So one of the things that we're going to do here is we're going to provide an in-depth analysis of the NIS2, but then keep it in simple terms. This is a legislation that is aimed at management bodies. It is not aimed at the techies. It is aimed at management trying to work their way through a set of security, a set of risk-based measures that will make their company safe, that will keep the European economy up and running, and will keep society as a whole safe. That's the intent. Yeah. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the depth of the NIS2, and then we're going to give them the trainees a very practical takeaway. And actually what I've integrated into the training is a complete gap assessment. So there's one day of just NIS2 basics. How does it work? How is it structured? What's the background? I'll go to that in a second. But then we will have a gap assessment in which we will actually go through these requirements and give people an opportunity to make an assessment in their own company, and then actually end up with a very nice scoring system. And I will show you that later on in this talk. So one of the things that I like about this, and obviously I need to like it about this, is that this is a security expert's insight. It is not a legal interpretation. I'm not a lawyer. I am a security specialist, and I can give you, I'm pretty well versed in reading law, so I can make the translation, but it will be my security expert's insight into this rather than, a legal interpretation. So like I said, what is it not? So it is definitely not an in-depth technical training. That is not what this training is all about. It is a training aimed at, the management layers in the organization so that they understand what is, heading towards them. Yeah, it'll be an analysis. It is not an analysis of the local legislation. So, NIS2 is a directive, and a directive needs to be translated into local law. There is 27 different local laws upcoming. Some of them are out there, some of them are not. They're being worked on. So this is about NIS2. Now, one of the first things that you might say, okay, so what's the use? Because there's going to be a local law. It will be different. Well, that I can tell you, it won't be. Now, NIS2, it has a lot of very concrete requirements that are expected to be translated into the law. And yes, there's going to be subtle differences. But overall, it will be something that we can really prepare for based on just the directive itself. Like I said, this is not a legal interpretation of the law. So what I did is I put together a slide deck. And you as the future trainers of this or potential future trainers of this, you are more than welcome to use this. I actually would prefer that you use this so we have a consistent story out there. Yeah, I've put the story, the slides in there to tell a story, your story, on the basis of the NIS2 itself. Now it gives you lots of opportunities, a very open, not very wordy type of slide deck. I try to keep it simple so you can tell your experience, your interpretation of it. Yeah, what I like in my trainings is to have the questions and have the discussions. So NIS2 is obviously new for everyone, but everyone gets confronted with it, especially the trainees that are attending this. And you will get lots of questions on them based on their own specific issues. We will have discussions on that. For me, that's a big preference. Yeah, avoid going into the technical details. And I've seen it, and a couple of times. I've been doing this training a few times already. And then people tend to linger on specific topics and try and have the discussion on how to implement it, what the technical advantages are of this product versus that product. That's not this training. The training is too short. It's a 2-day training. So focus on the essence. Yeah, you can obviously refer to other trainings, and I'm sure your training institutes will appreciate that if you use this as a very good basis to tell people, if you need to know more about risk management, we have a C-risk training, or we have an ISO 27005 training, or we have whatever trainings. So use it by all means to refer people to those trainings. My big advice, most of you, I expect, are not going to be lawyers in this training, so avoid framing anything as a legal advice. We don't do law, we do security. That's what we train. Yeah, and then you will see that the slide deck is supported by a courseware book. Use that as a basis for explaining the slides. I like freedom. I am Dutch. I enjoy, having my own take on things. And when I am training, I like to tell my story in the way I prefer. That means that, when I get a slide deck from a training organization, I prefer to have some freedom. Yeah, and I do not want to withhold that freedom for you as well. So if you feel it helps you tell the story, add your own slides to this. Make sure they serve the topic. Avoid all the different angles that that deviate from the main topic here. If you do that, and there's a good reason for you that do that, I'm going to assume it is, then I would really prefer that you share that information with me. I like continual improvement. So if you have additions that you think are going to further the product, by all means, let me know. And I'm happy to integrate good ideas into new versions of the slide deck. If you have any issues with the slide deck as it is, whether that's grammar, whether that's language, or you disagree with content, just contact me. I'm happy to update slide deck, do it centrally, or, if it is a content discussion, I'm happy to explain, my thoughts behind it and then why I put it in this way. So maybe we can get into a mutual understanding. You can provide the training in your local language if you prefer. And if you want to use a slide deck in your local language, then let's discuss that, because I want to make sure that we keep the consistency. And I don't mind, and I actually would very much like if we start getting, Dutch versions, French versions, Spanish versions, Italian versions. It is a European product, and the wider spread we have it, the more reach we get. I think it is for the better to have something consistent across Europe. So one of the things that are the few of the things that I do not want, that are things that I want to avoid, and the first one is to use the training as your sales pitch. I do training, I do consultancy. The two for me are separate. When I train, it is not a sales pitch to sell my consultancy. It is a training to help people understand the directive in this case. Don't start altering slides or remove them without letting me know. I don't mind, like I said, you telling your story, but if we're going to take elements out of the slide deck, that means you're going to take elements out of the story that I intended, and I would like to have that discussion about it. There is no that prohibition on it. It is just that I think, if you feel the story can't be told this way, I would like to know. Now, obviously, if you find any grammatical or spelling errors, feel free to just update them in your slide deck. Let me know about them. I will update it centrally, so when you get a new version, you don't have to go back and change everything again. Last thing, answer questions based on knowledge. This is new directive, new legislation. If you don't know the answer to a question, just say so. Commit to looking it up, or, I've been literally studying this and everything around the NIS2 for the last year and a half. I'm arrogant enough to tell you that, I know a lot about it now. So if you have things that you really don't know the answer to, you can always get back to me, ask me the question. I'm happy to answer it, explain it to you so that you have a good answer for the students in your room. That's it very much for what I expect out of the training from you guys and what I expect you won't do. Let me go into a bit of the exam details. Because obviously we will have a training. There is going to be a certification. We will get a NIS2 professional certification associated with the course. That means there is an exam. And the exam, when we take the course, there will be a voucher for the exam. They'll take the exam. There's going to be 40 questions, nothing big. They have a passing score 60%. As a trainer, we expect you to take the training as well, because we want to make sure that we have people that are competent in explaining the story. So for me, if you think you're confident enough, feel free to go for the exam rather than attending one of my trainings. But then a passing score of 75%. You get 60 minutes for the exam, which I think is plenty of time. It's not an open book. It will be in English for now, and in the future we might look at different languages, but that really is going to depend on demand, because as you can imagine, having a translation takes a lot of effort. All the exams are going to be supervised, and it's going to be a multiple choice exam, just like everything else you expect in most of these security exams nowadays. On the right, you will see there is a kind of structure on how we will cover the exam. So there is going to be some NIS2 background, and this is going to be really European background. What brought the European Union to go for this legislation? That will be 10% of your exam. There's going to be some explanation on the directive structure, which is 15%, a topic on roles and responsibilities, obligations that are there, 15%. General security concepts, just, really more on the definition kind of thing. So we have consistency, 10%. And then obviously the biggest chunk of it is what are we actually going to have to do? So the cybersecurity risk management measures are going to be 30%. And then there is a final section, pretty big section still on implementation, which will go a bit more into depth of these security measures and the approach, and how do we get this landed in the organization, which is going to be 20%. On a bit more detail, if it works with me, yes, you'll see structure here on the different topics. Now you see the chapters of the courseware are already associated with it, so it'll be easy for you to link it back in there. Then we have materials. Like I said, we will have the courseware. It'll be about a roughly 90-page book, which will cover all the topics that are also going to be in that slide deck, which we're also going to provide. There's going to be the exam, which I explained. Then we have the certification, the NIS2 professional certificate, and we have a book associated with it as well. And the book is called the NIS2 Navigator's Handbook, Bridging the Cybersecurity Gap. Yeah, the book is a much more extensive version of what we have in the courseware. It will go more in depth into the different topics. It will have a number of appendices that you can use to link to ISO. So there's an ISO mapping in there. There are mappings between the gap assessment and the legislation articles. There's an even more extensive gap assessment. So in the course, we will do a high-level gap assessment. In the book, it will go one more level in depth. And the book will also actually come with a code to access a Excel file in which you have a gap assessment that you can do, which for now is in 2 languages, and hopefully in the future we can add more, but for now it's in English and Dutch because that's my comfort zone. Yeah, but if we need to make French or Spanish or Italian versions, I am more than happy to accommodate that, and I just need the help in the translations. All right, that is pretty much the background on the training. Are there any questions so far? Nothing here?
Look like there's no questions so far. So the 2-day exam is coming. I prepared some. So Michiel, maybe, so you mentioned indeed that it's not a technical training. Does it still make sense for those technical professionals to participate in this training?
So it depends on what you call a technical professional. If we're talking about a core IT engineer, a core security engineer, then it's nice background information for them. If we're talking about a CISO who approaches the CISO role from a technical perspective, yes, absolutely, because in the end, they're going to have to set up their cybersecurity program in compliance with the NIS2, and this is going to help them give that structure.
And is there a minimal level of understanding you need to have to participate in this training? Can I don't have much security experience, except for using the capital in every password. That's a joke. Could I participate in this training, or do you advise some level of understanding of security and such?
So, if you're going to ask me, would my children be able to go through this? Probably not. But if you're a business professional, I would expect that this training will work. Like I said, because we avoid the technicals, it is focused, the whole NIS2 is focused on a business perspective. It is written towards management bodies of the organization. So yeah, they should be able to follow it. And we've already had classes in which we had lawyers, and we had actually a financial manager, and they've been able to attend the training and understand it just fine.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
All right. Shall I take you quickly through this the slide deck itself. Now, it's going to be a quick scan, so you're going to see a lot of slides just popping by, but I'll give you a general idea of what you can expect from this training. So, I think this is one of the first and foremost things to understand. Why this training? This is where I start the training, and then I take the Article 20, paragraph 2 of the NIS2 directive itself, and it's very clear what it says. Members of management bodies of essential important entities are required to follow training in order that they gain sufficient knowledge and skills to enable them to identify risks and assess cybersecurity risk management practices and their impact on the services provided by the entity. Need I say more? This is an instruction that management needs to get trained. Now, I know there's going to be a lot of companies that are going to say, yeah, no, we'll get our security officers to give us a quick training and then, we can move on. That is not the intent of the law. Yeah, and we'll see that actually, depending on the translations that we have, but there will be more clarity on what type of training management bodies are expected to follow. So a disclaimer, obviously a disclaimer, because, a security training without a disclaimer is not a security training. And then this is pretty much the division of the 2 days of the training. So day one, like I said, NIS2 basics. We'll start with EU program backgrounds. There's a lot of reason why we have this legislation. That's what we're going to go into. We get an outline of what the NIS2 is. We get the security concepts. A lot of public bodies and institutes that are associated with this. Then you get into the obligations that entities have. We get into supervision and enforcement, that make sure that the entities oblige. And then we get into a part on the roles and responsibilities within the organization that the NIS2 actually expects you to have. Then in day two is fully dedicated to the gap assessment. I can tell you, based on the experience, I've done it 3 times over now. The gap assessment is a full day. I've started it at 9, finished usually around 4:30 in the afternoon, 5 o'clock in the afternoon to go through this. Let's have a look at what this looks like. So, we have background. First thing, there was more out there than just the NIS2. There's actually DORA and the CER, the Critical Entity Resilience Directive, are 2 legislations very closely associated with. So linking those 3 becomes very important because NIS2 actually refers to them on different occasions. This is an explanation of why we have cybersecurity on the agenda. There is going to be different reasons for it, which we explain here. And then it goes into the strategies that Europe has, because the strategies are really the baseline for having this NIS2 directive in the first place. There was a directive 2013. Actually, GDPR came out of that one. NIS1 came out of this one. And then we have the Cybersecurity Strategy 2020, or as it's called, the Strategy for the Digital Decade. And that one is the basis on which the NIS2 is built, and a lot of other legislations are built. There is programs in there. Europe Fit for the Digital Age is one of the programs that actually support this and have their objective based on cybersecurity aspects. We have the Digital Europe program, which is actually a funding program that is associated with it. And that's not just NIS2, that's like the whole set of legislations that are associated with it. Which means that, there is, just to emphasize that, there is a whole bunch of legislation out there. So we have this one, regulatory framework, starting from November 2022 and moving up all the way to early 2024, gives you an idea of all the different legislations that are actually associated with its strategy and therefore also are associated with each other. We get into the outline. First, obviously, the NIS directive, which is the basis, and NIS2 is not called 2 for nothing. It is the sequel to this. So there is, identified shortcomings in the original one and improvements in the NIS2. This is what we're going to discuss here. Very concrete, what are those improvements? And the improvements are important because you will actually, if you understand them, you can actually relate them back. Once you start discussing the contents of the law, you can actually see the focus points that they've introduced into the law itself. Then obviously one of the very important things is the scoping. You know, a lot of companies still have a lot of questions. Are we in the scope? How are we in the scope? You know, which parts of our company are in the scope? So this is where this is discussed. You know, what is included according to the law? What is excluded according to the law? Which ones are optional, which is, you know, another thing in there. There are a few entity types that are optional to be included, as member states can decide or not. There is a basis on the sizing of the organization. So we'll explain that. You know, there is references in the NIS2 on, you know, different legislations and different recommendations, different directives. Actually, if you look at the NIS2, I made a count. There is over 140 different references to different legislations. So it can be a very confusing document to read. Yeah. One of the things I try to do in this training is to make that more approachable. So we have this on the sizing, because there is a sizing in the scoping. And then we get into the entity types. Now, for those of you that know NIS2 are going to say, well, critical entities don't exist. Well, actually, critical entities do exist. They just don't exist in the NIS2, but they do exist in the Critical Entity Resilience Directive, which, as I said, is associated with it. So you'll see that because of the link between the two, it is good to emphasize their existence and get a better understanding for organizations. We explain them here on the different ones: critical entities, essential entities, important entities, so you have a good understanding of what they are. We'll go into the difference between the two. And that's an interesting one, because the difference is actually very subtle. There is not a big difference between the two. For example, in terms of requirements, both have the same requirements. To the enforcement, that there is going to be deviations. I've tried to make it graphical just to get a bit of an understanding of what is in scope, what's not in scope. And then you actually also see, when you start analyzing this, that there are a few areas in which the NIS2 is not very clear. And I've highlighted those as well. We get into, you know, a bit of the structure of the NIS2 itself. And one of the things that I find that people are very confused about is the difference between recitals and provisions. Recitals are like the intentions of the law, and the provisions are the actual articles. And then you can see that the recitals actually number 1 through 144. So there is 144 different considerations that have been used to create ultimately 46 articles. And you'll see as you start reading the articles that some of the topics are very vague. They're very generic. When that happens, the recitals are the source to go back to. So you'll see that that link between the two is actually embedded in this course. This is the tricky slide, because it shows the status, and I try keeping it up to date. So at the moment, we have the status up until May 2024, as far as I can deduct. Yeah, so I use a lot of public sources to identify which countries have their legislation, which is working on it, and from which there is absolutely no signal that they're doing anything at all. Now, the fact that there's no signal doesn't mean that they're not doing anything. It's just that they're not communicating about it. But that is the status. So you see the, now obviously green, amber, red gives you the indication. We have the chapters. I like to talk about the chapters and give people an understanding of what is in the chapters, most of all because it helps compress the essence of the NIS2 for them. You know, most entities are going to be concerned only with 2 of these chapters for their compliance, Chapter 4, Chapter 7. We get into the security concepts. Yeah, general definitions, as you can see here, network information systems, the general properties. So in answer to Maurits's question, you know, how much do you need to know? We're going to go and just briefly touch on CIA, what is meant. You know, important to understand that there is more to it than that, because NIS2 actually introduces a 4th element into security, which is authenticity. So it gives you a good excuse to explain the full scale, which is actually these 6 that are shown in the picture. Explain confidentiality, integrity, availability, authenticity, and then just to make it complete, a quick slide on the other 2, reliability, non-repudiation. We talk about threats, and obviously cyber threats. how does that work? How is that constructed? Gives you a general idea of what to look at. Talk about vulnerabilities and vulnerabilities in relation to threats, how the combination actually creates your risks. Terminology like events and near misses. The near miss is a term that actually is defined in Article 6 of the NIS2, so make sure we explain it. Incidents, crisis. Interesting, because the NIS2 talks about crisis management, but actually doesn't talk about crisis at entity level, just at a national level. I've inserted a slide which is a bit of a sideline on NIS2, but I found that it really helps explain the structure between events, potential incidents, near misses, incidents, crisis, disaster, catastrophe, significant incident, as you will see it underneath crisis, just to get people an understanding of the scale of things. We get into risk, which is obviously one of the key elements in the NIS2. And I think, and this is one of the very important things when you start training, make sure that you understand that there are a few elements on risk that Europe really wants you, the Union really wants you to pay attention to. And that is the public safety, security, and health impact. That is systematic cross-border impact. That is societal impact, economic impact. And this is where it deviates from a lot of the standard risk assessments that organizations already do. So make sure you understand that and make sure you emphasize that for your attendees, your trainees, because this is where they will usually just go for their own focus on their organizational impact. Now, NIS2 is not looking at your organization, it is looking at the impact your organization can have on European society, on European economy. Obviously, risk and reward, so we make sure that there's a good understanding there. The concept of cybersecurity as part of information security. We get into standards, different standards that are referred to in the NIS2. So we make a summary on that. We're talking about managed services. Why managed services? Because there's actually something specific in the NIS2 with specific expectations by the directive. Cloud computing, same thing. Make sure that there is an understanding. If you look in the recitals on cloud computing, they will have specific elements in there. And one of the things that you will see when we talk about cloud computing, most of our security talk about IaaS, PaaS, SaaS, but there is network as a service as an additional one that the NIS2 explicitly mentions in the recitals, so we need to know about. Public bodies and institutions that we need to cover because they're going to be associated, they're going to be mentioned in the legislation, and they have a role to play. Cooperation group, won't go into the details, but as you can imagine, cooperation means cooperating. It's all about European cooperation. ENISA, and ENISA you will see, we'll spend a bit more time because ENISA has one of the key roles in this legislation. So there is different areas that, I will link it, you will see the articles in there, I will link it to the different articles in the law, just to make sure that people understand, what role ENISA has to play, and also what they can expect from it. More on standards, raising awareness, cooperation, and collaboration. And then we get into Cyclone. Cyclone is the crisis management organization in Europe. This is where they use the term crisis, and only here. We get into competent authorities. Interesting, I just came out of a course here. This is a concept that seems to be hard to grasp by people. What is a competent authority? So make sure they understand, it doesn't have to be one competent authority in your member state. It can be more. How do they work together, etc. So this is where we cover this. The CSIRTs, the Computer Security Incident Response Teams, again, they're not the same as a competent authority, but they have an overlap in roles and responsibilities. The CSIRT network, a concept actually already out of the original NIS, and shows the collaboration between the different CSIRTs. And then we get into the good stuff, and we actually get into what the entities are expected to do. And then there is a few articles that are really important. And I can tell you in a very short summary, look at Article 20, look at Article 21, look at Article 23. Those are the three articles that have the obligations for most entities. Now, it's the summary that I can give most attendees in the class as well. Those are key elements. Now, there is protective requirements, which you see in Article 20, 21, and there is reporting obligations, which you will see in Article 23. Link it to the ISO standards. Everyone is talking about the ISO standards because, yes, we don't have to worry about NIS2 because we have ISO. No, I mean, worrying about NIS2, I think, is the wrong attitude. That's one. But ISO, the way you have it in most organizations, probably does not cover the full picture. So explain the linkage between the two. ISO 27001 is a very nice starting point. But for example, the NIS2 expects business continuity, expects crisis management. Those are not covered in the 27001. 27001, when it comes to business continuity, only addresses information security within continuity, not business continuity in a whole. You need different standards for that. So this is where we make that clear. Then we have cybersecurity certification schemes. Those are European certification schemes, very important because a lot of people get, especially when it comes to supply chain, get frustrated about, how are they going to handle the supply chain? Supply chain control is one of the requirements in the NIS2. Certification schemes are going to be a big part in helping you on that. We get into supervision and enforcement, and then we move into that chapter 7. So actually what you saw here was chapter 4 of the NIS2, and this is chapter 7 of the NIS2. There's supervision elements, what the authority, the competent authority can do to supervise, how they're expected to supervise. And then there is enforcement, and enforcement comes in 2 stages. The nice and easy one where they give you a warning, tell you to fix things, maybe give you a fine. And then the interesting one comes in phase 2 when your company decides to ignore everything. Then all of a sudden there can be suspension of your certificate. They can actually prohibit management from executing their management responsibilities and put someone else in place to fix things. Or as a natural person, you may be held liable. Now that last one was an interesting one to make people very scared. I don't like fear, uncertainty, and doubt. So I usually avoid that. And I will tell you very simply, from a Dutch perspective, liability is a very unlikely scenario because we have that covered in different legislation. There may be countries out there, I don't know everyone's local legislation, so there may be countries out there where it is valid, but overall, for me, not a big worry. We get into roles and responsibilities. Roles and responsibility, obviously key. People are going to be very eager for this next slide, which is, what is my top manager expected to do? Yes.
Yeah, sorry. So we get compliments, and also you're doing very well and being very enthusiastic. But if you can, everybody's trying to follow, and if you can go a little bit slower, that's the feedback.
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm trying to keep it as short as possible.
Yeah, exactly, because everybody wants to enjoy the sun, but apparently what you're saying is really good. So,
all right.
Yeah, no worries.
So, if there is questions and you want me to skip back a few slides, let me know.
Yeah, those are for mainly compliments. So, yeah.
Good. All right. So, top management. This is one of those topics, people are dying to hear how they can put the responsibility back to top management. Everyone that's in security knows this is a challenge. So spend some time on this, elaborate on it. Top management has a direct responsibility. They have a direct liability. They are expected to be actively involved in cybersecurity, starting, 18th of October, 2024, assuming you have your legislation in accordance with, the instructions from the NIS2. And so this is key. Make sure that they understand your security officer should not be alone in this. It is no longer a one-man party or a one-woman party. Top management has a definite role in this. The information security officer obviously has to do a few things. And you'll see, unfortunately, you can tell it, top management fewer bullets than the chief information security officer. But hey, we like to be concrete on what this legislation expects from us. So here is just a few ideas of what you should expect from this security function. Now, the term CISO, I'm almost afraid to use it nowadays, because the term CISO is obviously contaminated on every single front. We have CISOs that are somewhere, just a bit higher up in the organization than, the trainee, and they report to the IT manager, who reports to, the director of IT, who reports to the CIO, who reports to the chief financial officer, who reports to the CEO, and then ultimately you get nothing done. So the word chief gets a bit doubtful in here. This is what we would expect from this role. This is really, if you read through the intent of the NIS2, this is what the NIS2 actually would expect you to take as a role. Yes, the data protection officer. We can never forget the data protection officer. There is an element that does actually refer to the GDPR. There is a few articles in there that kind of say, oh yeah, by the way, there's this thing called the GDPR out there, so make sure you do your alignment. One of the concerns that the NIS2 very nicely addresses is the concern that we are going to overload organizations with administrative responsibilities. So one of the things that they want member states to do is to find alignment in the reporting obligations. You need to report to your authorities for privacy. You need to report to your authorities for the NIS2, the information security. You need to maybe do it for a financial perspective. One of the things that they drive at is finding a consolidated way to have a single reporting point for organizations, rather than having to go to all these different locations. So that's an instruction for the member states. That gets to the involvement of the data protection officer. It is only an indirect role, still there. And then obviously, how can we forget our employees? Employees have a role in this. There is typical requirements on security awareness. So, we need to make our employees aware. Our employees are expected to act in accordance with the law. That should be no surprise, right? So we need to explain it to them. And then we have a role for third parties and the supply chain. And especially that last part is the nightmare, because it is very easy to talk to your third party. It is impossible to talk to your supply chain. So how are we going to be able to keep control of the supply chain? Spend some time on that. I've tried to put some ideas into the book on how to do this, but yeah, it is the challenge, and hopefully the European Union is going to help us. One of the things that they're going to help with is the certification schemes, where certain products, certain services are going to have to be certified for you to use them. Which, once they're certified, you can assume that, if the European Union approves it, well, then they must have approved the supply chain as well. So that's how hopefully life is going to be a bit more easy. At the moment, though, there is no certification out there yet. And there is no instruction in the NIS2 to use certified products. So this is going to be in delegated acts, or whatever alternative you will use in your local country.
Do we have time for some Q&A?
Yes, absolutely. This is a good spot.
So yeah, I figured. I did already answer a few of the questions. So you received some compliments and praise. Then what did I answer? So indeed, the courseware, all trainers can get free. So how the courseware works with us is that per delegates you pay for the material. The trainers get the material for free, let's say. So you don't pay to see the training material. But when the training is conducted, you pay per delegate, for those that don't yet work with us or have partners, external partners that just hire them. We expect the courseware to be ready within 2-3 weeks. Michiel already provided everything, but now we as Van Haren need to, I sometimes say add some makeup, but it's already quite final. we just add some visuals, but it's nearly there. So it's a matter of prioritizing. So I guess 2-3 weeks we can already share the slides with you all. And then I have a very in-depth question. Actually, it is from my father, who is also in the industry. And I will also address the question you mentioned before. So I will add on to the question as well. So you addressed before that many organizations assume that if they have the ISO 27002 or 1, they feel like they are quite ready. I also got some comments from other training organizations that figured that they could just take a ISO 27000 training and add an additional module on it so that it would be NIS compliant or NIS effective. Do you think that will be a workaround, if I can say so, or can you tell why that would not work?
So if you look at ISO 27001, it is a management system. From that perspective, yes, you can absolutely use the management system to build your NIS2 compliance. But I think one of the tricky parts is the translation that people make when they talk about 27001, which is they talk about 27001 and the Annex A, or actually 27002. And that is a whole different ballgame. So those are the controls that we implement, but there is numerous controls out there that are just not addressed. So we have business continuity, as I said. We have crisis management. We have control effectiveness. Emergency communications. So there's a number of things that are specific in the NIS2 that are not actually addressed. And then there's a few aspects, if we talk about awareness, for example, awareness is a very generic topic, but if you look at what the NIS2 actually says about awareness, and you look at the recitals, there are specific topics that they want to have covered in the awareness. So they're talking about cyber threats, they're talking about phishing, they're talking about social engineering. So those are things that you have to do. Cyber hygiene, basic cyber hygiene, one of the requirements. What is basic cyber hygiene? It'll interest you to see that if you start looking at the recitals, all of a sudden, zero trust principles come up as basic cyber hygiene, which is an interesting approach because, in my book, zero trust principles are not basic. So you'll see this is where there's a deviation between especially the Annex A and what the NIS2 requires. And there's numerous examples like that. So that's one of my big concerns in just doing it as a kind of add-on. The second one is that there is an impact assessment where the ISO 27001 looks at expects you to look at the impact on your organization. But we're beyond that. This is looking at impact on the European Union, on its economy, on society. So there is different elements that you need to add to your impact analysis. You can still do it through the methodology. It is just expanded.
Yeah, thank you. Then the question goes a bit more in detail, but I suggest that we do that at the very end of the session in the Q&A, remaining time there. And then we continue here. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
All right. So then we get into the good stuff of the gap assessment. So we're pretty much through day one. It will give them all the background on what to expect, and this is where we start looking at the Article 2021-23, really where the requirements are explained. And what we'll do here is we'll go through different topics, address them, explain what is meant, and then do the gap assessment through a number of statements that each of the trainees can actually fill in their own form, and so that we get a result at the end. So this is really what it comes down to. You will have a percentage scoring that we're going to go through. There's going to be 14 different sections, as you can see here. Each of the sections we will go through during the day. So we'll start at A1, and at the end of the day, our last one is going to be control effectiveness, A14. We add them all up, and we will be able, and through basic scoring I'll show you in a second. You'll be able to get a actual company score. How are we faring? What is it? You would expect in the perfect organization to have a score of 1,000 over 1,000. My experience so far is that there's companies somewhere between 300 and 720. And there's going to be parts in there that you just don't have. Is that a bad thing? Well, if you want to be compliant, yeah, probably. But is it hard to fix? Maybe not. So this is how we're going to go through that. 14 sections, A1 through A14. There's going to be a brief discussion, and then we're going to have them start scoring each of the sections. Now, the way they're going to score is they're going to fill in a compliance percentage. So they get a statement, and based on that statement, they're going to say, well, we comply somewhat with it, maybe 50%. So they will put a compliance percentage of 50%. Each of the statements has a maximum score. So let's say the score is 10 for one statement, and they say, well, we're there for 50%, then obviously they will have a score of 5. This is how it will work. Each of the sections ends up with a maximum of 100 points, which very nicely translates into a percentage, which is what you see in this spider graph ultimately. So it'll be easy to plot that way. Yeah, the final score, that score out of 1,000 is actually very simple. We get all the scores for the different sections. So you have 14 sections and you divide it by 1.4. Yes, I know people are going to need a calculator for that one, but I'm sure they can work it out. So let's quickly go through some of them. The first one, obviously, cybersecurity program. You need to have a program. While it's not completely explicit that you need to have a program, if you want your management to start managing your risk management measures, the only thing to do is have a program. So this is going to go into that. We have a reference to the article, some references to the different elements in there. We'll go into management reporting, and in the cyber program, then obviously one of the things that you will have is the question, okay, how are we going to ensure that management understands and gets committed? Yeah, so that commitment is a value creation exercise. So what we actually do is we'll go through the different types of approaches that you have for value and explain to people that typical security is actually in that number 3, where we try and convince the board that there is a value through protection. Where we actually go into the board and say, oh, listen, we need money. I need 100,000 euros for you because I think that in the future somewhere something might be happening and it could be very big. I'm not sure, but it could be. This is exaggerated value through protection approach. Now you can imagine that if that's what the board hears, and this is what they hear, regardless of how well you politically play that game, you're going to say, there's different things that are more interested. We want to grow as a company. We want to optimize, have fewer costs, and have more, and actually a better ratio. So those are the other 2 values. And this is the discussion where you say, okay, try and convert your approach of value through protection to get into a value through growth or a value through optimization. Now you'll see that the courseware has a nice section in there, section 7.1, which will explain, the different ones, so the approach to it. Then we get into the review statements. These are the statements that we actually go and sit down. This is where everyone gets out their gap assessments, and they will have these statements in their manuals, in their courseware, and they can start filling in their compliance percentages, make the scoring. 4 simple statements for A1. Moving into risk management. Obviously, the core of the NIS2 is that organizations are required to make an assessment of their risks and based on the results, determine what is appropriate in terms of risk management measures. Yeah, do not get confused. The list of requirements that the NIS2 actually lists in that Article 21 is a minimum baseline. They say, regardless of your results of your risk assessment, this is the least you should be doing. And then they give you those 10 points that are listed in the directive. Yeah, but what the core of it is, they say you have to do your risk assessment. You have to identify your risks, you have to determine what's acceptable, and you have to take appropriate measures against them. So this is what the topic is all about. Actually, very nicely emphasized in this slide. Get into the different elements, and you will see I have gone throughout the slide deck and made the references to the different recitals and the different articles. So it's easy for you to refer back to the original. One of the documents that I will always keep next to this is the actual legislation. You know, people will have questions about it. I will jump into the legislation and say, okay, look, this is what it says. This is where you can find that text. This is how you need to interpret it. Risk assessment, no surprise there with the different steps, you know, and then this is where it becomes a gray area. Is it NIS2 or is it common sense? And this is where, you know, you as a trainer and your expertise, you add your value. You know, show them ways to work this. This is what this day is about. People need to understand what they need to do. They need to have ideas of how to do it. So, you know, address that. But again, watch out, don't go into the technical details because that's not what the day is all about. Yeah, identification, analysis, evaluation, the different aspects. Again, as much as I can, refer it back to the articles. We get into treatment, and then obviously treatment is where you get that list of requirements, and you will see on the right-hand side in the column that I've listed those requirements. Now, I told you there's 10. And if you count the pink stars in there as the bullets, then I'm sure you all realize that there's more than 10. I have no idea why they did that, but it's a very interesting thing. If you look at those 10 requirements, they kind of, you know, aggregated a few of them together where they really should be separate. So we have, you know, secure communications together with multi-factor authentication. No idea, but I think, you know, someone out there when they were drafting the law said, okay, give us just a base of 10 requirements. And that's what they did. They couldn't figure out which ones, so they just comma separated them. And then we have a list of 10. Yeah. But there is actually more out there. Now, this is my guesswork, mind you. I have no idea how they did it, but you know, I like to think that's how they came about that list. Again, you know, 4 statements here on the gap assessment that you will go through. And then we get into policies. There's a number of policies out there that you need to do. One of the most common ones is obviously the information security policy. Now, interestingly enough, the NIS2 actually doesn't mention an information security policy. It mentions an information system policy, but if you start reading through the lines, then there is really no way to avoid having an information security policy. So that's why we do cover it in here. Then there is the code of conduct, acceptable use. And you will actually see that referred to in the recitals, even though it is not explicit in those requirements. The risk management policy is, there is an explicit reference to having a policy of risk analysis. So this is where we have that. And the information systems policy, obviously out there as well. We get into yet another 4 compliance statements. And then we get to business continuity, disaster recovery, explaining a bit of it. And I think one of the most important things to explain in the whole business continuity topic is actually the distinction between those 3 elements of business continuity, crisis management, recovery management. You know, people tend to mix the 2 layers that you see here together. I like to make sure that they understand that there are 2 different processes that are going on at the same time. And explaining that helps them understand, you know, the relation between the 2. You know, how business continuity, you know, decides really what the priority should be in recovery. So business continuity planning, you know, actually this legislation says, or the directive says, you need to do business continuity. Honest, you know, I have no idea how you can do business continuity without at least having a business continuity plan. In theory, it is not required by the law. In practicality, I think it is the only sensible thing to to evidence that you are doing proper business continuity. So we will go into this and explain the different elements that you will have in business continuity planning. And then obviously one of the key ones is the business impact analysis. And even though the law does not actually say anything about those acronyms, and you can hardly avoid them when you talk about business impact analysis, that you talk about service delivery objectives, maximum tolerable outage, recovery point objectives, recovery time objectives. So that's why they're in here. Staffing requirements, obviously, as a key element that you need to consider. Separate one on crisis management, which is one of the elements that they do mention explicitly in those requirements. Testing and training. You know, no plan is right without testing and training. So if you're going to do business continuity and you haven't tested, you haven't trained, then you really haven't done business continuity. So it needs to be included. And that's why we address it in here. Disaster recovery planning. Yep, one of the elements in the NIS2. Backup management as a part in there. Again, one of the explicit elements mentioned in the NIS2. And then we have, obviously, you know, this is quite a big topic with a lot of variations in there. So we have 8 assessment statements here in total. Moving into incident management, you know, the NIS2 is very simple. It says do incident handling, yeah, and you figure it out. You can actually see in the reporting obligations that there are a few phases in there that are implied, but they're not made explicit. So it is up to you to determine how you do incident management. The way I do it, I will actually go through the flow, and it's a very generic flow. I did not invent it. It is just, you know, common sense kind of flow. So I will walk them through the different steps that you see in that picture up above, explain the different steps in there. We get into things like detection and response. Detection and response elements, you know, logic from an incident handling part, because you need to be able to detect your events. Again, not explicit. You see a few references here and there, but there's no explicit requirement for this. It's just common sense. So we get into detection mechanisms, response mechanisms. Again, you know, actually a fairly big topic. So there is another 8 statements here that we verify. System lifecycle management, and we go into system lifecycle management very much from, you know, the NIS2 perspective. I mean, you can talk about system lifecycle management all day, but you know, the core elements that are actually referenced in the NIS2, that's for me what is important to make sure that we express here. You know, we get into concepts like security by design, privacy by design. This is actually where the GDPR pops up in the NIS2. Yeah, a bit more on that, and then we get into 6 different review statements. We get into human resource security on A7. Human resource security talks about joiner mover lever process. Yeah, interestingly enough, though, if you start looking through the NIS2, it doesn't talk about joiner mover lever. It just happens to talk about joiner, and actually not even directly, but indirectly by referring to the Critical Entity Resilience Directive and say you need to be in line with those requirements. And those requirements are in the Critical Entity Resilience Directive, Article 13E, 1E, and Article 14. So that's how we determine that. You know, yes, there are things, you know, if we're talking about joiner, mover, lever, this is all joiner. Yes, we are going to talk about mover, and we're going to talk about lever because it makes sense in human resource security. They're not explicit requirements, but the requirement is human resource security. So, you know, it's implied that you do address all of it. 3 statements on this one. A8 is supply chain security. Supply chain security, like I said before, you know, the difficult topic. Different references throughout the document. We'll go through that. We'll take the different steps of procurement, of contract management, of relationship management, and address them and relate them back into the NIS2. And then again, you know, 4 statements. Asset management, combined with vulnerability management. Why the two combined? Because vulnerabilities happen to always be in assets. So I prefer to combine the two rather than splitting them up. Both.
Michiel.
Yes.
Sorry, can I ask a question about that came in through the chat about the previous section? If let me translate it. What is your opinion? If a customer asks suppliers to be audited by CIRA and/or quality mark, should suppliers be audited by CIRA and/or quality mark if their NIS2 customers ask this of them?
So if we're talking about auditing, it's a tricky topic. Auditing is a broad topic. A lot of people think auditing is walking into the data center and actually doing all the verification yourself. Auditing is a process in which you have an independent verification that your security requirements are being met. You can do that through third-party audits. I have no illusion of walking into a Microsoft data center to do my own verification, but I have a website full of certifications by objective third parties that have done the audit for me, so I verify that. If I see requirements that certain parties need to audit, that's always a negotiation you have with your supplier. There's no right or wrong in that. What you will see though, and that's not in the current version of the NIS2, but this is what they've announced in the NIS2, is that the European Commission or your own member states may decide to introduce specific requirements for the entities in scope to start using certified products, certified systems, or certified services. And when that happens, then obviously you're going to set your requirements for your supplier. Suppliers are not required to deliver certified products. The NIS2 does not cover that as a requirement for them. It will, in the future, through delegated acts, actually require specific sectors to use specific certified products or specific services. So that's how, as a supplier, you may be confronted with that requirement, and then it's up to you as a supplier whether you're going to comply or not. Basically, answering the question whether you want them as a customer or not. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. The comment was that because ISO 27001 is too heavy. Yeah, because there are certain organizations that want their organization CIRA certified. Therefore, as elaboration to the question. Yeah, I think it's okay. Yeah,
yep.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, so asset vulnerability management. Obviously, some references to vulnerability management and interesting requirements that you will see on your C-certs that can do vulnerability scans in your organization, externally facing. They can do that for essential entities actually without asking, or they can do it upon request. So there's an interesting vulnerability option there. Then there is the coordinated vulnerability disclosure, which is now a requirement in the NIS2. So we have to do something on coordinated vulnerability disclosures. There is a handling and reporting process that needs to be in place according to the NIS2. So that gets discussed. One of the things that I will then refer to is the security.txt, which is actually one of the easy ways, very low effort way to start complying with this directive. Asset management is a topic that is included, not really specified. So we're going to have to go through what we can see as what is included in asset management. You'll see me refer to the recital 79, where it says you need to take an all hazard approach and protect assets in the physical environment, system failures, human error. So you see that asset management becomes broader than just your simple IT system, but there is no real specifications there. And we get into 4 different statements again. Moving into A10, cryptography, encryption. One of the things that I do here is just make sure that people understand the difference between cryptography and encryption. They're not the same concept. Interestingly enough, the NIS2 actually says you need to have policies and procedures regarding cryptography and, where appropriate, encryption. Honest, I don't know a single organization that cannot explain that they don't need or can explain that they don't need encryption. It is an appropriate in every single organization. So my conclusion is you need to have policies and procedures for cryptography and encryption. Cryptography being the broader science behind it, that also includes things like hashing, for example. Now, this is what I make sure when we talk about this, that we'll explain what is included in cryptography and then move into the topic of encryption. And encryption obviously has those 3 phases, stored information, in transit or in use, and have a look at that. Interestingly enough, NIS2 actually mentions encryption and cryptography in the requirements as a very generic statement. The only explicit references that you will then see on encryption technologies are related to electronic communication services that you see in those 2 recitals on the screen. So it's a bit of a vague topic, other than you need to do something about it. 3 review statements on this one. Access management can come as no surprise to anyone that that's included. And then when we look at access management, I've taken the broader scope of access management. So we're going to look at access management in the different articles, and then you'll see that access management includes a lot of different elements. Part of the zero trust principles is network access control. So that's actually included in the NIS2, even though you won't find it explicitly in that Article 21. Multi-factor authentication, continuous authentication, privileged access management, they all pop up in the NIS2. Continuous access management and multi-factor authentication are very explicit, and the other ones you kind of have to read through and see that they are actually in the recitals as an expectation. So here we discuss privileged access management, multi-factor, and continuous authentication. The latter one, continuous authentication, tends to be the unknown part, fairly new technology. Most companies still don't use it, so it's good to reference it and explain it a bit of what the functionality is. And again, careful, this is not having a technical session about it, but give an understanding of how it works. And ultimately, it's a risk-based authentication mechanism. And then obviously we have network access control, because in access management, there is device access as well, and that's covered through a network access control system. So part of the zero trust principles, so that's the translation that comes out of that. We have in total 7 statements on this topic. We get to A12, and A12 is the tricky one. It is basic cyber hygiene and actually basic security awareness. So looking at that, we start looking at what they mean by basic cyber hygiene, and you get into recital 89 of the law, and then you actually see that they have a few examples of what they understand to be basic cyber hygiene. Zero trust, software updates, device configuration, network segmentation, identity and access management, and user awareness. So by putting those things together, we can kind of conclude that this is what they expect us to have. So we go into the zero trust principles. You see them on the right-hand side. Those are the 5 principles that are used. What I've done there is, for each of the bullets, actually said, okay, what is a suitable control that you can use? They're not necessarily explicit in the law. They're just common sense kind of controls that you could use for them. Software updates, patch management, no surprise there. If you actually want to see another gap in the ISO 27001, it doesn't mention patch management. So patch management is one of those things most auditors will expect it, but there is no explicit reference to patch management in the standard. Device configuration management, another one of those topics. Yeah, and this is where I will also talk about system hardening. And then we get into the cybersecurity training, which actually is approached in different elements throughout the NIS2. So we'll see it come back into the recitals. We will see it in Article 20, where we actually have management bodies that need to be trained, where they say it's recommended to also train your employees. But then in Article 21, they actually say, well, you need to have cybersecurity awareness training. So that's where we discuss it here. We get into the details of cybersecurity training. Some of the specifications, typically in making that distinction between the management training requirements and the employee awareness requirements. Then moving on into the last part of the basic cyber hygiene is network segmentation, and discussing actually really the two different types of segmentation that are common out there. Functional segmentation, which is what most organizations will have nowadays. Micro-segmentation, which is really more in line with the zero trust principles that basic cyber hygiene refers to. Then we have review statements, and we have 7 in total. Almost there. We get into secure communications. 2 parts in secure communications. They're actually in the final bullet of those basic requirements. They talk about multi-factor authentication. They talk about continuous authentication. And then out of nowhere in that same line, they talk about secured voice, video, and text communications. And they talk about emergency communications. So this is where, we will talk about secured voice, video, and text communications. And, what can you expect from that? There's really very little that is explicit in the law, other than that, you need to do this. So what I've done is I've taken it from the different CIA and authenticity, so CIAA elements, and started looking at, okay, so how can we address that, in terms of having a secure network and information system. And then there is the secure emergency communications, which is referred to as the secure emergency communication system within the entity. So this is like your first responder, your first aid communication system. You need to be able to communicate if everything else is down. That's what we explain in here. 2 review statements, because there is not a lot to say about this other than there's some very basic wording. And then we get into the last one, which is also one of the bizarrest ones, because the NIS2 actually asks you to create a control effectiveness policy. It is the requirement, policy and procedures. So I never heard of a control effectiveness policy. I started Googling it, and I figured, that result was definitely worth a slide. So Googling something and only getting 336 results means that it doesn't exist. Yeah, they actually said, okay, well, we have 21 results. All 21 results were not related to a control effectiveness policy. So NIS2 has managed to invent something completely new. Yeah, so how are we going to comply with that? My expectation, but this is expectation, definitely not law, is that they're just going to ignore that they ever said that. Yeah, we can't do that. As trainers, we're going to have to say, okay, this is what they want, so they're going to get something. So I started just thinking about, okay, what can we put into a policy that would actually make sense? And this is what I came up with. So this is my invention. Feel free to shoot me down completely on this topic and say, oh, no, this is completely different. I'm happy to hear your ideas. And then we can start upping the number of hits in Google a bit. I think that would be interesting. Yeah, then there's procedures, and obviously control effectiveness procedures are much more related to the individual controls, so that's easier to do. And again, 2 statements. At this point in time, everyone will have their statements completed. They've filled in their compliance percentages. They've done the calculation. We'll give them a bit of time to actually finalize their scores. And then you get into a result that looks something like this. They will have a field where they can actually mark down the scores for each of the sections. They can plot it on the web graph, give them a very good idea of what it looks like, and then they can calculate the score. Now, in the gap assessment, in the training, we actually have the paper version. In the book, there will be the link to the Excel. And the Excel, I can just quickly show you. Obviously, it looks a lot nicer, but it's a different story altogether. So this is the Excel, and actually this one is in Dutch for now, but you will see that we can easily translate it to English. So now we have the English version here. Now, it's a locked down Excel, but it's very easy to do. So we have the cover, gives you basic instructions, some Excel tips. We get into the assessment, and you will see all the statements in English. If you convert it to Dutch, which is the two languages I have at the moment, you will have all the statements in Dutch. Now, the blue ones that you see here are actually the ones out of the training. The white ones are the sub-level indicators. So if I decide not to put something in here and decide to add the information in here, and I'll say, okay, I have 45% here, and I have 23% in here, and I have 10% in there. So, you'll see that actually starts adding up your scores, and you get a total result. You already see the actions popping up each time you enter a result, but you have your nice results over here as well, and you see it automatically calculates, and you don't have to plot your own graph. You'll see all the scores in here. You can just print it. It has a color coding, so if we have everything on 100%, then obviously it's going to be green, and it's going to give you 1,000 out of 1,000. Then we also have the action list, which actually summarizes all the actions that the gap assessment shows. So you can just simply print this. I formatted all the printing. You can easily print this, and people can actually take it home. That's the idea. In the training, mind you, I don't want the hassle of having technical issues with Excel. That's why we go for the paper version, which works pretty well. All right, so I think I have everything covered.
Okay, very nice. Thank you, Michiel. Yeah, it must be quite a, how should I say, blur talking for almost 1.5 hours in one go. Thank you for addressing that. Look, there we got some cheers already. Yeah, I think you're all trainers, so you know all how it feels like, but still. Now it's hotter outside and it's extra difficult. Any questions or comments? I think that for many, the Excel must be a very nice gimmick. That's something that we, well, I say we, but I will admit that one of us did more of the thinking than the other one. But we thought that adding the Excel will be a really nice add-on to the training, because then candidates directly have something to take home to their organization. They can already really start doing something. So I think Michiel before said, don't make it into a consultancy session, but at the end of the training, they got all the problems they need to solve. So I think at that moment, the consultancy session can start. So I think that's very, that's very nice. I hope you all also like it. If you have more questions, now is the moment. This is the time. I see here a question. I must admit that I don't fully understand it, but the question is if the table cross-references A1 to A14 with ISO 27001.
No, so what I've done is I've referenced the table with the legislation. So you'll see that each of the statement actually refers back to an article in the law itself to give you that link. And I've referenced it to the chapters in the book, so you can refer it back there. But I have not made that mapping in the on the ISO.
Yeah, I think that also answers the next question. And I think that, yeah, maybe one of the reasons not to include the, so one comment is that it would add value. And I guess we all agree that it helps. Although I do think that we also, with this product, we also try to focus a bit on the NIS2. But yes, it will be a strong add-on. Then there was this, are there any other questions from someone? Because then I go back to a very specific question that came back earlier. Yeah, I see a question there. Nicolo, nice to have you here from Italy, if I'm not mistaken. Is that also, did you mention it on purpose or not, Michiel? You mentioned Italy before. I think we have one trainer here from Italy.
Oh, no, I had no idea he was there, but I'm glad to see that he's there, and I really hope he enjoys this. And I'm happy to work with him to do an Italian translation of this.
Yeah, nice. Okay, perfect. Feel free to, we have some people writing now. And I think, yeah, we had some different nationalities in here before as well. Yeah, I wait 1 second before moving to that other question, because I think that's the question to finish with, maybe. Yeah, I got one comment, Nicolo, about the chat in Dutch. All the comments in the chat I have translated in the questions. So don't worry about those questions in Dutch in the chat, because they have been asked. So you didn't miss anything. Thank you, Michiel. See you later. Hope you enjoyed. We got a confirmation of the Italian translation, Michiel, so that's nice.
Very nice.
Good luck. Right after making the DORA and the e-learning, then you can go to Italy for Italian. But thank you, Nicolo, for participating. Yeah, then we got some more compliments from our friends from too. Thank you for participating. We stay in touch. Yeah, then I need to read this correctly. I will just read out loud what it says here. Sorry. Yeah. First, to answer your question, Nicolo. So in about 2 to 3 weeks, we have the courseware and the certification ready, and then we will send you all a message where we invite you to do the certification if you want, and we provide you the training material. So you can certify for free, and if you manage to pass over 75% and you can show that you have training experience, then if there's an accredited training partner, they can with you conduct the training. But please feel free to ask more questions, and maybe, Nicolo, I might also know a training party in your environment that might be keen to have you as a trainer, but let's do that one-on-one. Then Bjorn, so this is the question, Michiel. Do I understand correctly, NIS2 is law, legislation, requirements, and implies fine/accountability, in contrast to the ISO, which is accountability and optional on demand per sector requirement? Question mark.
I'm not sure I follow the question now.
So is it correct that NIS2 is legislative,
Yep,
and that ISO is optional, basically, is managerial, I guess.
So NIS2 is a directive. So it is it comes out of the European Commission. They have, or actually European Union, I should say, they have said that this is an instruction to member states to create a local legislation, and that instruction includes all the specifications really that we've flown through in this 2-hour session. But it is a requirement. The different countries are going to create their own law based on those requirements. No deviations, just interpretations, really. So this is going to be the requirement. ISO, on the other hand, is a voluntary framework. So you can choose to certify against ISO, you can choose to comply with ISO, but that's a choice you will have to make as an organization. It is absolutely not required in the NIS2. Actually, the text 27001 does not appear in the NIS2. There's only one reference in the recitals where it refers to 27000 series as an option to use to comply with actually physical environment elements, but that's it. So you can be compliant to NIS2 without ISO 27000.
Yeah, and I believe that one of the requirements is also that there's training to the board, right? And that's a hard requirement, it says.
Yes. The training to the board is a must, Mind you, this is okay. We're getting into different translations. Directives get issued in different languages, and the central English one, I prefer to call it the central one, but I have no idea if that's what they use. But my assumption is everyone writes together on the English version. The English version talks about management bodies. If you translate it, a management body is any layer of management. If you look at the translated NIS2s, you will see that there is variations where they actually talk about board of directors. For me, that is a mistranslation, because board of directors, yes, they obviously have a responsibility here, but if you want to be effective in an organization, you want to make sure your management body is trained and understands the risk management, not necessarily just the board. But I already seen it in the Dutch translation. They are actually talking about the board of directors rather than management. So that's a shame. We'll have to see if that works out. There's an internet consultation on the Dutch one. It's one of the points I mentioned, and actually saw it pop up. More people that have a concern there.
Yeah, that was one of the questions, and I think you already elaborated partially now, is that how do you feel about the difference in the law executed in different countries, where you see that the Belgium has a lot of pages, and apparently the German version might have up to 200 phrases of law. And
so
I'm
actually going through the Belgian legislation at the moment, reading through it, see how it actually maps into the NIS2, and make an assessment there, see where they have subtle differences. I actually so far like the Belgian one. It's very nice and concise. I've seen the Dutch one. I haven't seen the German one, but I've heard that German tends to go very wide. They have to be very careful with this, is my advice to any of the member states, because there is an intent by the European Union to create consistency across the European Union. If we start, having all these different interpretations and all these different, specifics and requirements, I think NIS2 is going to fail, just like, I won't say fail, but at least be only half as successful as it could be. We need to leave responsibility to organizations to make that interpretation and mature it in the terms that they find. And yes, when there is absolutely something that is critical in a certain industry, I can imagine that a country will say, okay, we need to be more specific. Like DORA being, like a delegated act really of the NIS2 for the financial industry. So that I can see. But if we start splitting it, and I see the movement here in the Netherlands, and apparently Germany is going that same direction, I think they're missing the boat. It is not going to be a consolidated European approach that way.
Thank you. We got some confirmation on your viewpoint. Then what was the question we went into earlier? We already addressed this comment before about leveraging the ISO 27000 as source. And then here we got a comment, what if I use the ISO 27002 and then harden it or add on with it with a 22301 and the ISO 27701 and go to Annex A with the, it's hard to translate this, with appendix and build on top of that using a risk analysis of VVT, then I think I have everything covered, right? And then you gave a response in which about how you would fill it in, the difference between the NIS2 and the ISO 27000, and then the reply was, well, that's nearly what I'm saying.
So just on that final reference, the combination of 27001, 22301, that's a good strong combination to look into compliance. And the 22301, for those of you that are unfamiliar with it, is the business continuity management system. So you get that cover, where there's a gap really in the 27001 in relation to NIS2. which is on business continuity. You will see in the book, actually, I've made the mapping also to the 22301 to show you where the overlap is. So yes, using 27001, using the controls in 27002, using the 22301, that's a good combination. The 27701 is a privacy management system. So yes, it always adds value. It is not really specific on the NIS2, but it is a nice addition to have in there. My big advice would be if you do that, make sure that you cover the elements like the ones we showed at the last. Control effectiveness, not covered explicitly in the control set of the 27001, nor on the 22301. If we talk about secure communications, emergency communications, not explicitly covered in those standards. So yes, they're very good baseline, absolutely, but not complete if you want to have that full compliance.
Yeah, and we now go a bit into detail. I suggest I share this question with you, and then we kind of make it a day. And so to go on what you just mentioned, also a suggestion is the IoT 62443, or harden it with the CSF 2.0 to harden the controls. And then you have to build extra on the A5 to A8. I must admit, this is for me gibberish, but maybe you.
So the CSF, we're talking about NIST now, American Cybersecurity Framework, the NIST Cybersecurity Framework 2.0. Yes, will be a good baseline to work alongside. Again, this is a methodology. It is not a control set, so make sure that you address the controls in there. Forgot the other one you mentioned. So the CSF
and the IoT 62443.
Oh yeah, 62. So the ISO 62443, very interesting one. This is about OT, operational technologies. For me, this is where the NIS2 actually is a bit meager. It doesn't really express any specifics on OT. In some areas you can imply it and see that you can use it. So yes, I think especially when you're an OT-oriented organization, when you have your production environments, then the 62443 is going to be a good addition to make sure that you're compliant in that area.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we indeed that's why I also said, Bjorn, we address these two points and then we wrap it up. Maybe Bjorn has one last comment. As I mentioned, the recording will come available to you. We expect the book in September, the certification and the courseware in a few weeks from now. Yeah, I'm checking if Bjorn has one last comment coming through. Almost being in there. Bjorn says, maybe stop focusing on compliancy and get technicalities in order, then you're compliant as a result. Okay.
So yeah, so this is absolutely my favorite. We're talking about law. So law is about compliance. We can turn it inside out, upside down, but law says you need to be compliant. Now, if you ask me as a security professional, then I say, start with your security and through security become compliant rather than focusing on compliance, trying to become secure.
Okay. Well, that's a nice little last ending quote. Perfect. Then thank you very much, everyone, for participating. Thank you, Michiel, for giving us this insight and making everything you made so far in this material and making it available to us. Yeah, it was a really nice session. I'm quite happy indeed with everybody turning up on this Thursday hot afternoon. And I wish you all a pleasant remainder of the evening. And stay in touch. Thank you very much. Have a good evening. Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Harry. End the call now.